The heavy wooden doors of the grand velvet swung open, welcoming the cool evening air of the city. But inside, the atmosphere was usually thick with warmth and the smell of expensive food. This place was not just a restaurant. It was a fortress for the wealthy. The floors were covered in deep red carpets that swallowed the sound of footsteps, and the tables were set apart from each other so that people could talk about their big business deals without being overheard. On any normal night, the air would have been filled with two things: the soft clinking of crystal glasses and the flowing sound of a grand piano sitting in the corner of the room. But tonight was different. Tonight, the piano sat silent under a spotlight that made the black shine look lonely. Monica moved through the tables like a ghost. She was a young woman who didn't like to be looked at for too long. Her uniform was crisp and black, her hair pulled back tight, and her eyes were almost always cast downward toward the floor or the plates she carried. She worked with a quiet kind of speed, never bumping into anyone, never making a sound unless she had to speak. She was good at her job, but she was invisible. That was exactly how she liked it. She carried a heavy silver tray loaded with lobster risotto and steaming bowls of soup toward table 4. As she walked, she couldn't help but glance sideways at the empty piano bench. It was a habit she had developed over the last few weeks. Every time she passed the instrument, her fingers would twitch slightly at her side. A tiny, unconscious movement that she quickly tried to hide. Monica had a secret that nobody in this restaurant knew. She hadn't just grown up listening to music. She had lived inside of it. Before rent bills and student loans and the sudden illness that took her father, she had been a student at the most prestigious music academy in the state. She could play pieces that were so difficult they made grown men sweat. But life had a way of getting in the way of dreams. When the money ran out, she had sold her keyboard, moved into a smaller apartment, and traded the stage for a serving tray. The music was locked away inside her, gathering dust like the old sheet music sitting under her bed at home. Tonight, however, the silence was bothering everyone, not just her. The restaurant manager, a tall man named Mr. Holloway, was pacing back and forth behind the host stand. He was sweating. He kept looking at his watch, and then looking at the empty spot where the pianist was supposed to be. "Where is he?" Mr. Holloway muttered to himself, checking his phone for the 20th time. The musician, an older man who usually played smooth jazz standards from 6 to 9, had called an hour ago. His car had broken down on the highway, and there was no way he was getting to the restaurant. To the wealthy customers sitting in the velvet chairs, this was a minor tragedy. They came here for the experience, and the experience was missing its soundtrack. Monica placed the food down in front of a young couple, who were too busy looking at their own phones to notice her. She murmured a quiet "enjoy your meal" and turned away, wiping her hands on her apron. She felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief because the music wasn't there to remind her of what she had lost. But anxiety because she knew what was coming next. The front door opened again, and this time the energy in the room shifted completely. A man walked in who didn't just look wealthy. He looked like he owned the city itself. This was Elias Sterling, a real estate tycoon whose name was often in the newspapers for buying skyscrapers and tearing down landmarks. He was an older man with silver hair and a face that rarely smiled. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Monica made in a year. He walked with a heavy cane, not because he needed it, but because it made a distinctive sound on the floor. Tap, tap, tap. It was a sound that demanded attention. Mr. Holloway rushed out from behind the stand, his face pale. "Mr. Sterling." "Welcome back, sir. We have your private booth ready, as always." Sterling didn't look at him. He was looking around the room, his eyes narrowing. He didn't like change, and he didn't like imperfections. He followed the hostess to his table, which was situated in the best spot in the house right in the center of the room, with a perfect view of the piano. He sat down slowly, adjusting his cuffs, and looked around. He waited for the music to start. 10 seconds passed, then 20. Sterling frowned. He picked up the heavy silver menu, looked at it, and then slammed it down on the table. The thud made the couple at the next table jump. He looked around for the manager and snapped his fingers. It wasn't a polite snap. It was the kind of snap a master might use to call a dog. Mr. Holloway rushed over. terrified. "Is everything to your liking, Mr. Sterling? Why is it so quiet?" Sterling demanded. His voice was deep and gravelly, carrying across the room. "I come here to have a pleasant dinner, and I feel like I'm sitting in a library. Where is the pianist?" Mr. Holloway swallowed hard. He knew that upsetting Elias Sterling was a bad idea. The man had a temper and the influence to destroy a business's reputation with a few phone calls. "I am terribly sorry, sir. We had an emergency. Our regular musician had a car accident on the highway. He won't be coming in tonight." Sterling stared at him. "An accident? Is he hurt?" "He is fine, sir. Just stranded. But we are working on a solution. Perhaps we can put on the stereo system." Sterling shook his head violently. "I do not want to listen to a recording while I eat a $300 steak. I want atmosphere. I want live music." He gestured toward the empty piano with a look of disgust. "That instrument is the centerpiece of this room. Leaving it empty is lazy. It insults the customers." Monica was standing near the service station refilling water glasses. She froze when she heard the Tycoon's voice. She knew Mr. Sterling by reputation, just like everyone else in the city who read the news. She peeked around the corner of the station. He looked angry. He looked like a man who was used to getting exactly what he wanted, exactly when he wanted it. Mr. Holloway tried to explain again. "We have called everyone on our list, sir, but it is a short notice. No one is available." Sterling leaned back in his chair, picking up a glass of wine that the waiter had just poured. He swirled the dark red liquid around, his eyes never leaving the manager. "So we sit in silence. I pay for a premium experience, and I get silence." "I could play," a voice offered quietly. Monica flinched. It was the bartender, a young guy who knew 3 chords on a guitar. He was trying to be helpful, but Sterling just waved a hand at him, dismissing him without a word. "No," Sterling said firmly. "I don't want amateurs. I want skill." He took a sip of wine and looked around the room, his gaze sweeping over the waitstaff, the busboys, and the customers. He was looking for a solution to his problem. He hated being inconvenienced. It made him feel powerless, and Elias Sterling never liked to feel powerless. Monica ducked back behind the service station. She prayed he wouldn't look her way. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her. The silence in the restaurant was getting heavier by the second. Customers were starting to whisper, looking at the angry Tycoon and then at the empty piano. The tension in the air was tight, like a rubber band ready to snap. She picked up a pitcher of ice water. Table 9 needed a refill. It was Mr. Sterling's table. She tried to hand the pitcher to another waiter, a tall man named Tom, but Tom shook his head rapidly, backing away. He was terrified of the old man. "You do it?" Tom whispered. "He's in a bad mood. You're calmer." Monica wanted to argue, but Tom was already gone. She took a deep breath, smoothed down her apron, and picked up the pitcher. She walked out into the dining room. The carpet was soft beneath her shoes, but it felt like she was walking a tightrope. The room seemed enormous. Every step felt louder than usual. She reached the table. Mr. Sterling was arguing with Mr. Holloway about the quality of the wine now, finding a new reason to be upset. He was a man who, once displeased, would find fault in everything. Monica stepped up quietly. "Water, sir?" she asked, keeping her voice soft. Sterling stopped talking mid-sentence. He looked up at her. His eyes were sharp and gray, analyzing her instantly. He saw the cheap uniform, the tired eyes, and the way she held herself small, trying to take up as little space as possible. "Fine," he snapped, "but make it quick." Monica reached out with the pitcher. As she poured the water, her eyes betrayed her. Just for a second, she glanced over the man's shoulder at the piano. It was a long look, a look filled with a deep, aching sadness. She looked at the keys as if they were an old friend she hadn't seen in years, or maybe a lost love she could never get back. It was the kind of look that people only have when they are thinking about who they used to be. Before life got in the way, she stopped pouring and pulled her hand back. Realizing she had filled the glass almost to the brim, she quickly looked down at the table, embarrassed, hoping he hadn't noticed her staring. But he had. Elias Sterling noticed everything. He paused, his glass halfway to his lips. He set it down softly. The annoyance on his face shifted slightly, replaced by a look of curiosity. He had seen that look before in business meetings, the look of someone who knows exactly how to solve a problem, but is too afraid to speak up. He turned his head slightly to look at the piano, and then back at the shy waitress. He smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was a smile of a hunter who had just spotted prey. The water in the crystal glass rippled slightly, the only movement in a room that felt like it was holding its breath. Monica quickly pulled her hand back, tucking the empty pitcher against her side like a shield. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, a familiar and unwelcome flush that always gave her away whenever she felt the spotlight on her. She had hoped to pour the water and vanish into the shadows before Mr. Sterling noticed anything, but it was too late. The look she had given the piano-hungry, sad, and painfully obvious had been seen. Elias Sterling didn't look away. He leaned back in his chair, the heavy wood creaking under his shift and weight. He studied her face. He was a man who spent his days looking at blueprints, financial spreadsheets, and negotiating deals worth millions. He knew how to read the small details that other people missed. He saw the way her fingers were curled around the handle of the silver pitcher. Not tight with tension, but loose and graceful. He noticed the calluses on the tips of her fingers. Faint, but there. The kind of marks left by pressing down on wires and strings for hours every day. He had seen that same longing look in the mirror when he was a young man, staring at buildings he wanted to own but couldn't afford. "You have a very specific way of looking at that instrument," Sterling said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the quiet room like a knife. Monica flinched. She tried to step back, to put some distance between herself and the table, but her feet felt heavy. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to stare." "Don't apologize," Sterling said, waving a hand dismissively. "Answer me. You play?" The question hung in the air. Monica's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew the correct answer. The safe answer was to say no. She should say she just liked the way it looked, or that she used to take lessons as a kid but quit. That was the answer that would let her go back to the kitchen, hide for the rest of her shift, and go home. But something about the way he asked, the directness in his eyes, made it hard to lie. "Not anymore," she whispered. "I mean, not really. It's a yes or no question," Sterling pressed, a slight smirk playing on his lips. He was enjoying this. He loved solving puzzles, and right now, this shy waitress was a puzzle he wanted to figure out. Either you know how to make that thing make music, or you don't. Which is it? "I know the notes," Monica admitted, barely audible. She looked down at her shoes. "But I am not a professional. Not like the man who usually plays here." Sterling let out a short, sharp laugh. He turned to the manager, Mr. Holloway, who was standing a few feet away, looking nervous. "You hear that? She knows the notes. And yet here we are, sitting in silence because your professional is stuck on the highway." The manager stepped forward, wiping his forehead with a napkin. "Mr. Sterling, please." "Monica is a wonderful waitress, but she is here to serve food. We have standards for our musicians, and right now, your standard is silence." Sterling interrupted, his voice hardening. He turned his attention back to Monica. "You. Sit down." Monica's eyes went wide. She looked around the room, desperate for an exit. "Sir, I can't. I have tables to serve, and I'm not dressed for it." "Oh, nobody cares about your clothes," Sterling said. He reached into the inside pocket of his expensive suit jacket and pulled out a thick roll of cash held together by a gold band. He peeled off a $100 bill of crisp, new note-hand, slapped it down on the white tablecloth. Right next to his plate, the sound of the money hitting the table turned a few heads nearby. People at the surrounding tables were pretending to eat, but their ears were perked up. They sensed a scene brewing, and in a place like this, drama was rare. "Here's the deal," Sterling said, his eyes locking onto Monica's. "I don't like eating in a library. I want music. You go over there, you sit down, and you play something. Anything." Monica stared at the money. $100. That was 2 days of tips for her. It was a bag of groceries. It was her electric bill. But it wasn't about the money, and they both knew it. It was about the fear. The paralyzing fear that had made her quit in the first place. I really don't think I should, Monica stammered. Her voice was shaking. It's been a long time. I'm rusty. I would just ruin your dinner. If you ruin my dinner, you leave the money and you walk away, Sterling said, shrugging as if it were the simplest thing in the world. But if you play, and you play well, you keep the tip, and I'll add another 0 to it. A low murmur went through the nearby tables. $1,000. Just to play a few songs. Monica shook her head. Please, sir. I'm shy. I can't play in front of people. You're a waitress, Sterling said, gesturing around the room. You walk around strangers all night, taking orders, bringing drinks. You are performing right now. The only difference is the stage. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a challenging whisper. Unless, of course, you were lying about knowing the notes. Unless you just look at that piano because you wish you were talented enough to sit there. Is that it? You're a dreamer, not a doer. That stung. It hit Monica right in the chest because it was the one fear she carried with her every single day. She had left the academy because she was afraid she wasn't good enough, afraid of the competition, afraid of the judgment. This stranger, this rich tycoon, was poking at her deepest insecurity with a stick. She looked at the manager. Mr. Holloway looked terrified, but he also looked at the piano. If the customers were happy, especially this customer, his night would be saved. He didn't say anything to stop her. You have 30 seconds, Sterling said, checking his heavy gold watch. Then I ask for the check, and we leave this silent tomb. The pressure in the room was immense. It felt like the air was being sucked out of the space. Monica felt trapped. If she walked away now, she would feel like a coward for the rest of her life. She would always wonder if she could have done it. But if she sat down and failed, she'd be humiliated in front of a room full of strangers. Her legs felt like lead as she took a step away from the table. Then another step. She wasn't walking toward the kitchen to hide. She was walking toward the corner. She moved slowly, like she was walking to the electric chair. The other patrons watched her. Some whispered behind their hands, wondering what the daughter of the owner was doing, or perhaps if they were about to witness a disaster. The waitstaff froze in place, their eyes wide. Even the cooks had poked their heads out of the kitchen window to see what was happening. Monica reached the piano. It was huge. It smelled of lemon polish and old wood. The black finish gleamed under the spotlight, mocking her. It had been 3 years since she had touched a real grand piano. She played on a cheap electronic keyboard in her apartment sometimes, late at night with headphones on. But that was different. That was private. This was exposed. She reached out to pull out the bench, but her hand was trembling so badly she almost knocked it over. She steadied it with her other hand and sat down. The bench was cold and hard. From her seat, she could see the entire restaurant. She saw the couples, the business meetings, and right in the center, she saw Elias Sterling. He had picked up his wine glass again, but he wasn't drinking. He was watching her over the rim of the glass, his expression unreadable. He was waiting. Monica placed her hands on her lap. She wiped her sweaty palms on the fabric of her apron. She took a deep breath, but the air caught in her throat. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear a rhythmic thumping in her ears. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. She lifted her hands and hovered them over the keys. The white and black ivory stared back at her. They looked like teeth. She felt the weight of 100 eyes boring into her back. She felt the $100 bill sitting on the table like a judgment. Just play one note, she told herself. Just one. Then you can run. She closed her eyes for a split second to block out the room. She tried to imagine she was back in her tiny apartment, alone with her music. She tried to remember the feeling of the strings vibrating, the sound filling the room. But the smell of expensive food and the clink of silverware kept dragging her back to reality. Her pinky finger twitched. It was a habit from her days of training. She found the C key. She hesitated. The silence stretched out, agonizing and heavy. Mr. Sterling shifted in his chair, audibly sighing. Monica gritted her teeth. She couldn't let him win. She couldn't let him be right about her being just a dreamer. She let her hand drop. The first note rang out, sharp and clear, slicing through the silence like a bell. It wasn't a mistake. It was a perfect resonant C. She held it, letting the sound vibrate through the floorboards and up into her bones. Then, without thinking, her left hand found the bass note, and her right hand began to move. She started playing a simple scale, testing the feel of the action. It was heavier than she expected, requiring more force, but it responded beautifully to her touch. For a moment, she just played warm-ups. Do-re-mi-fa sol. The sound was clean. The fear was still there, screaming in her head to stop, but her fingers remembered what her brain was trying to forget. They knew exactly where to go. She took another breath, this one deeper, and let her muscle memory take over. She stopped the scales and shifted her hands. She was about to cross the line. She was about to stop playing notes and start playing music. She could hear the voice of her old teacher in her head telling her to play with feeling, to stop thinking and just let it out. Monica opened her eyes, looked at the keys, and launched into the first real melody. The room gasped collectively. The sound was no longer just a note. It was a cascade of sound, fast and fluid. She was playing an old classic, a piece of jazz that she had learned 1,000 years ago. But she was playing it with a speed and precision that seemed impossible for a waitress. Mr. Sterling lowered his glass. He stopped chewing. He stared, and for the first time that night, his face showed no arrogance. It showed only shock. Asterisk, the first few notes had been simple, testing the waters, but now the music changed. It was as if a dam had broken inside her. Monica's fingers, which had been trembling with fear just moments ago, suddenly locked onto the keys with a strength that surprised even her. She wasn't playing a gentle background dinner song anymore. She had launched into a complex, stormy piece that seemed to grab the silence by the throat and shake it. The sound filled the high ceilings of the restaurant, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers and the expensive artwork on the walls. It was a jazz standard, but she was playing it with a speed and intensity that was usually reserved for concert halls. Her right hand flew up and down the keyboard, creating a blur of motion, while her left hand provided a deep, rhythmic foundation that you could feel in your chest. For the first minute, Monica kept her eyes squeezed shut. She was terrified that if she looked at the people watching her, the magic would stop. She was terrified she would see Mr. Sterling laughing, or the other diners looking bored, or her manager shaking his head. She played to block out the world. She played to drown out the voice in her head that told her she was a failure, that she was just a waitress who had wasted her potential. The music was loud. It wasn't the polite, barely there tinkling they were used to. It was aggressive and fast. Notes clashed together in a beautiful way, then resolved perfectly. It sounded like rain pouring down on a tin roof, then like thunder rolling in the distance. Then something strange happened. The fear began to dissolve as her fingers moved faster. Hitting the keys with precision, Monica felt a warmth spreading through her body that had nothing to do with the stage lights. It was a feeling she hadn't felt in years, pure, unadulterated freedom. For 3 years she had been Monica the waitress, the girl who was invisible, the girl who served rich people their lobster and then went home to a dark apartment. But right now, under this spotlight, she wasn't that girl. She was a musician. She opened her eyes. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked only at the piano. She saw the dust motes dancing in the light above the keys. She saw the reflection of her own face in the polished black wood, her expression fierce, her brows furrowed in concentration. She looked alive. Mr. Sterling had stopped eating entirely. His fork was hovering halfway to his mouth, a piece of steak balanced precariously on the tines, but he didn't seem to notice. He was staring at the woman in the black apron. He had expected a clumsy performance. He had expected her to fumble through Mary Had a Little Lamb and then run away crying. That was the bet he had made in his head. But this was a masterclass. He watched her hands closely. He didn't know much about music theory, but he knew excellence when he saw it. There was no hesitation in her movements. Every note was intentional. Every pause was calculated. She wasn't reading music. She was playing from memory and from the soul. The arrogance that usually defined his face melted away, replaced by a look of pure, unfiltered fascination. He slowly lowered his fork onto his plate, making a soft clink that was immediately swallowed up by the music. The rest of the room was undergoing a similar transformation. The quiet murmurs that usually buzzed through the grand velvet had died out completely. It wasn't just that the music was loud. It was that it was captivating. A young couple at table 3, who had been arguing quietly about their finances, stopped talking. The husband looked at his wife, then at the piano, and reached across the table to take her hand. The tension left their shoulders. The group of businessmen at table 7, who had been boasting about their latest stock market wins, turned their chairs around. They stopped checking their watches. They stopped checking their phones. They just watched. Monica hit a complicated run of notes, a cascade of sound that tumbled down the scale like a waterfall. Her left hand crossed over her right, a daring move that required total confidence, and she nailed it. The sound resonated through the room, vibrating against the wine glasses. She began to sway slightly with the rhythm, her body moving to the beat that she was creating. The shy waitress who couldn't make eye contact was gone. In her place was a woman commanding the room without saying a word. The music allowed her to speak when she couldn't use her voice. Through the piano, she was telling them all about her pain, her hard work, and the love she still had for the art she thought she had lost. She played a soft, delicate section, her fingers barely touching the keys, drawing out a whispered, quiet melody that made everyone lean in. The room was so still, you could have heard a pin drop. She held them in the palm of her hand. Then, without warning, she slammed her hands down on the lower keys, bringing back the thunderous rhythm. The contrast was thrilling. It was like a story being told in sound, a story of struggle and triumph. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working. The chefs had come out of the kitchen, wiping their hands on their white coats, standing in the doorway with their mouths open. They knew Monica. They saw her every day, tired and overworked. They had no idea she possessed this kind of power. The dishwasher, a man who usually kept his head down and scrubbed pans, was standing near the service station, a huge grin spreading across his face. He felt a sense of pride, as if by knowing her, he was part of this moment too. Monica felt the energy of the room shift. It was a physical sensation, like a wave washing over her. She realized they weren't judging her, they were with her. The anxiety that had paralyzed her earlier was being replaced by a rush of adrenaline. She felt electric. Her fingers didn't feel like her own anymore. They felt like tools of something greater. She decided to take a risk. She began to improvise, straying slightly from the sheet music she knew in her head. She added a few flourishes, a few extra trills, speeding up the tempo just a notch faster than she had ever practiced. It was dangerous territory. One wrong move, and the spell would be broken. She didn't miss a single note. The complexity of the music was soaring now. It was fast, intricate, and beautiful. It required a level of focus that blocked out everything else: the smell of the food, the feel of the hard bench, the ache in her back from a long shift. There was only the music. Mr. Sterling sat back, his arms crossed over his chest. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a mocking smile this time. It was a smile of genuine appreciation. He loved talent. He thrived on it, and he realized he had stumbled upon something rare. He had challenged a shy girl on a whim, thinking he would get a moment of cruel entertainment, but instead, he was getting a private concert from a hidden genius. He looked around the room and saw the spell she had cast. He saw the wealthy socialites forgetting their status, the businessmen forgetting their greed. For the first time in a long time, the people in this room were united by something real. Monica's fingers began to ache slightly. The familiar burn of a long practice session, but she didn't want to stop. She felt like she could play all night. She was flying. The notes were pouring out of her, flowing like water. She hit the climax of the song, the volume swelling to a crescendo that vibrated the floorboards. She threw her whole body into it, her arms rising and falling like waves. The restaurant was no longer a place of business. It was a concert hall. The world outside, with its bills and its noise and its expectations, had ceased to exist. There was only Monica, the piano, the rapt audience of 50 strangers who sat in stunned silence, wondering how they had ever underestimated the shy girl in the corner. The final moments of the piece were approaching, and Monica's fingers were moving so fast They were almost a blur to the naked eye. The music had reached a fever pitch, a storm of sound that filled every corner of the room. She wasn't just hitting keys anymore. She was attacking them, pulling the emotion out of the strings with a ferocity that startled everyone listening. Her body swayed with the rhythm, her head tilting back as the melody climbed higher and higher, building toward the inevitable climax. Then came the final run. It was a series of descending notes, rapid and precise, like a staircase leading down into the deep, dark earth. Her hands crossed over each other in a complex dance that defied logic. The sound thundered through the restaurant, vibrating the silverware on the tables and making the wine glasses tremble. And then, silence. Monica's hands dropped into her lap. She played the very last chord, a soft, resonant low note that seemed to hang in the air like a heavy cloud, and then she lifted her fingers off the keys. The instrument stopped singing instantly. The echo of the music lingered for just a second, bouncing off the high ceilings before fading away completely. Then, the reality of the room rushed back in. The air conditioning hummed softly. The kitchen staff in the back let out a collective breath they didn't know they were holding. Monica sat there, frozen. Her chest was heaving, her hair slightly messed up from the intensity of her movements. Her fingers were tingling, the adrenaline still pumping through her veins. For a few heartbeats, she didn't open her eyes. She was terrified to look up. She was afraid that if she opened them, the spell would be broken, and she would see a room full of bored faces or people checking their watches. She was afraid she would see Mr. Sterling scowling at her. Being too loud, but the silence that followed wasn't the awkward silence of disapproval. It was a heavy, awestruck silence. It was the kind of quiet that falls over a crowd when they have just witnessed something they know they will never forget. It lasted for 5 seconds. Then 10. Slowly, nervously, Monica opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was the manager. Mr. Halloway. His mouth was slightly open, his pen hovering over his order pad, completely forgotten. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Then she scanned the room. The couple at table 3 was staring at her, the woman holding a handkerchief to her chest as if she were about to cry. The group of businessmen at table 7 weren't looking at their phones. They were looking at her, their expressions blank with shock. Monica felt a wave of panic crash over her. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. What had she just done? She had made a scene. She had played loudly, aggressively, taking over the restaurant without permission. She wasn't a performer. She was a waitress. $100 or not, she had crossed a line. The shy girl from the beginning of the night came rushing back. She felt exposed. She felt vulnerable. The power she had felt while playing evaporated, leaving her feeling small and naked under the bright spotlight. She quickly scooted the bench back, the wood scraping loudly against the floor. The harsh noise made her flinch. She stood up, smoothing down her apron, her eyes darting toward the safety of the kitchen door. She needed to escape. She needed to hide. She started to turn away, intending to run to the back room and grab her coat and leave before anyone could say anything to her. Wait, the voice was deep and authoritative, cutting through the quiet like a knife. Monica stopped in her tracks. She knew that voice. It was Mr. Sterling. She slowly turned around, her heart sinking. He was going to scold her. He was going to tell her she was rude, or that the music was too loud, or that she had embarrassed him. He was going to demand his $100 back. Mr. Sterling was standing up. He pushed his chair back with a heavy hand. He didn't look angry. He didn't look arrogant. He looked different. His face was softer, his eyes wide with a kind of wonder that didn't suit a man who owned half the city. He adjusted his suit jacket, staring straight at her.
Ow!
"Don't you dare go anywhere," he said, his voice carrying across the room. He started to clap. It was a slow, rhythmic clap. Clap, clap, clap. The sound seemed to wake the rest of the room up. The man at table 3, the one who had been holding his wife's hand, jumped to his feet. He started applauding, a huge smile on his face. Then the businessmen joined in, hitting their hands together enthusiastically. Within seconds, the entire restaurant had erupted. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was a roar. It was a wave of sound that hit Monica and nearly knocked her over. People were whistling. A few near the back were even stomping their feet. The waiter, who had been hiding in the service station, Tom, was cheering the loudest, clapping his hands red. Even the chefs in the kitchen doorway were applauding. Waving their towels in the air, Monica stood there, paralyzed by the noise. She looked from face to face, seeing genuine admiration, even joy. These were people who usually ignored her, people who treated her like furniture. Now, they were looking at her with respect. It was a sensation so foreign it made her head spin. She brought a hand up to cover her mouth, her eyes stinging with sudden tears. Mr. Sterling walked out from behind his table. He walked through the clapping crowd, parting them like the Red Sea. He moved toward the piano, his eyes never leaving Monica's face. He stopped right in front of her. He was much taller, up close, and his presence was still intimidating, but the edge was gone. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her, searching her face, as if he was trying to memorize it. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. Monica flinched, thinking he was going to ask for the money back. But he didn't pull out a single bill. He pulled out a checkbook. It was a thick, leather-bound book that looked older than she was. "You," Sterling said, pointing a finger at her gently. "You are a liar, young lady." Monica blinked, confused. "Sir." "You told me you didn't play," Sterling said, a small, genuine smile breaking through his serious expression. "You told me you were rusty. That was the biggest lie I have ever heard. You play like you have a fire inside you that is trying to burn its way out." Monica didn't know what to say. I was scared." "Good," Sterling said firmly. "Fear makes you sharp, but fear shouldn't make you hide. Not with a gift like that." He flipped his checkbook open and pulled a pen from his pocket. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask how much she wanted. He just started writing. The scratch of the pen nib against the paper was audible even over the applause, which was beginning to die down as people leaned in to see what he was doing. He wrote with swift, bold strokes. He wasn't writing $100. He wasn't even writing $1,000. He scribbled for a long time, signing the bottom with a flourish that looked like a piece of art itself. Mr. Sterling tore the check out of the book. He held it out to Monica. It was a long white slip of paper. "This is for you," he said. "It is not a tip. It is an investment." Monica stared at the check, but she didn't take it. Her hands were trembling again. "I can't take this, sir. I just played for the dinner. I didn't mean to. I was just trying to help." "You didn't help," Sterling said, shoving the check gently into her hand. "You woke everyone up, including me." Monica looked down at the paper. The numbers were written in Sterling's strong handwriting. It wasn't just money. It was a life-changing amount. It was enough to pay off her debts. It was enough to buy a real piano. It was enough to rent a small studio where she could teach. "But why?" Monica whispered, tears finally spilling over and running down her cheeks. "You don't even know me." Sterling looked at the piano, then back at her. "I know talent when I see it, and I know waste when I see it. You are wasting your life carrying trays of food for people like me. You belong on a stage. Maybe not here. Maybe in a hall where people pay to see you." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear over the remaining chatter. "I have spent 50 years making deals, building buildings, and making money. I have met CEOs, presidents, and movie stars. In all that time, I have never seen anything as real as what you just did. Don't you dare insult me by throwing it back in my face." Monica gripped the check tight. The paper felt crisp and substantial. She looked at the man who an hour ago she had feared. He looked back at her, and for the first time, she saw a human being behind the Tycoon mask. He saw her, not as the waitress, but as an artist. "Go find a teacher," Sterling said, patting her shoulder awkwardly. "Go back to school. If you need more, you come find me. But do not let that instrument gather dust again." He turned back to the room and raised his glass. The crowd, sensing a toast, raised their glasses too. "To the pianist," Sterling announced, his voice booming again. "The best surprise the Grand Velvet has ever had." "To the pianist." The room echoed back. Monica stood there, clutching the check, weeping openly in front of the strangers. The shy girl was still there, hiding behind the tears. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She looked at the piano one last time, knowing deep down that she wasn't done playing. Not by a long shot. The applause in the room was starting to fade into a low, buzzing murmur, but inside Monica's chest, the noise was deafening. She clutched the check in her hand, the paper crinkling under her sweaty fingers. It felt heavy, heavier than the silver trays she carried every night. She looked from the check to Mr. Sterling, then to the piano, and finally to the crowd of people who were still looking at her with wide, expectant eyes. It was too much. The adrenaline that had fueled her performance was rapidly draining away, leaving her legs feeling like jelly and her stomach churning with a mix of excitement and pure panic. She needed to breathe. She needed to be alone. "Excuse me," Monica stammered, her voice barely audible over the conversations that were starting up again. She didn't wait for a response. She turned and practically ran toward the kitchen doors, pushing through the swinging double doors and leaving the elegant dining room behind, inside the kitchen. The atmosphere was chaotic, but in a good way. The chefs, who usually spent their nights barking orders and sweating over hot stoves, were gathered near the prep tables. When they saw Monica burst in, they stopped what they were doing. For a moment, there was silence. Then the head chef, a burly man with a thick mustache, who had never said anything nicer to her than hurry up with that order, started clapping. One by one, the other cooks joined in. Even the dishwasher, a quiet man who barely spoke English, gave her a thumbs up and a nod. "Beautiful," he said simply. "Just beautiful." Monica felt the tears threatening to spill over again. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and forced a weak smile. "Thank you," she whispered to the room. She grabbed her bag from the small locker near the back office, ignoring her uniform. She just wanted to get out of there. She needed to process what had just happened without people staring at her. She walked out the back door of the restaurant, into the cool night air. The city was alive, cars rushing by on the street and neon signs flickering. But it all seemed distant to her, like she was watching a movie through a thick pane of glass. She sat down on the crate that the delivery drivers used to stack milk cartons and unfolded the check Mr. Sterling had given her. She had to look at it 3 times before the numbers actually registered in her brain. It was more than enough money to pay off the credit card debt she had been carrying for years. It was enough to cover 6 months of rent. It was enough to buy a decent used piano and pay for lessons to get her skills back to where they used to be. She folded the check carefully and put it in her wallet and tucked her wallet into her pocket. She stood up and started walking. She didn't want to take the bus. She wanted to walk, to feel the pavement under her feet and the wind on her face. She needed to convince herself that she wasn't dreaming. The next few days passed in a blur for Monica. The check cleared the bank instantly. She went to Mr. Holloway, the manager, expecting him to fire her for abandoning her shift or causing a scene. Instead, he offered her a raise. He told her she could play the piano whenever she wanted, but she politely refused. She knew that playing at the restaurant was a one-time spark, a moment of magic that couldn't be forced into a routine. She needed something more with her newfound financial cushion. Monica did something she hadn't done in a long time. She made a plan. She quit her job at the Grand Velvet. It was a terrifying decision. The steady paycheck, as small as it was, had been her safety net. But as she handed in her apron, she realized she didn't want a safety net anymore. She wanted to fly. She found a small, dusty music studio in a basement 2 blocks away from her apartment. The teacher there was an older woman named Mrs. Gable, who had once been a concert pianist, but now taught children how to play Twinkle. Twinkle, Little Star. Monica walked in, sat down at one of the upright pianos, and played the same complex piece she had played for Sterling. Mrs. Gable listened without interrupting, her face stoic. When Monica finished, Mrs. Gable stood up, walked to the window, and closed the blinds so no one passing by could see in. "You have raw talent," Mrs. Gable said, "but your technique is full of holes. You play with too much emotion and not enough discipline. If you want to be great, not just a dinner party trick, you have to start over. Can you handle that?" Monica didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said. "I can handle it." So, the hard work began. Monica's life became a cycle of scales, arpeggios, and exercises. She practiced for 6 hours a day. Her fingers, which had once been soft, grew strong and calloused again. She learned to control her breathing, to sit with perfect posture, to read complex scores that looked like foreign languages. It wasn't glamorous. There were no applause, no standing ovations, and no checks for $1,000. There was just the dusty studio, the smell of old books, and the constant sound of the metronome ticking away her time. 6 months later, the city's symphony hall announced a special competition for young pianists. It was a prestigious event, the kind that usually attracted students from the best conservatories, the ones with rich parents and fancy degrees. Monica almost didn't sign up. She was just a waitress who practiced in a basement. She didn't belong in that world. But every time she doubted herself, she remembered the look on Mr. Sterling's face. She remembered the feeling of the heavy wooden key under the note that silenced the room. She remembered the check in her hand, not for the money it represented, but for the belief it represented. Someone believed she was worth something. It was time she believed it too. On the night of the competition, the symphony hall was packed. People dressed in their finest clothes sat in velvet seats, waiting to be entertained. The atmosphere was stiff and formal, completely different from the warm, noisy restaurant. The other contestants were nervous, pacing backstage and wringing their hands. But Monica felt a strange sense of calm. She wore a simple black dress. She didn't have expensive jewelry. She just had her music. When her name was called, she walked out onto the stage. The lights were blindingly bright, hiding the audience from view, which she was grateful for. She sat down at the massive concert grand piano. It was the biggest piano she had ever touched, gleaming black and white under the lights. She adjusted the bench, flexed her fingers, and closed her eyes. She wasn't thinking about the judges sitting in the front row with their clipboards. She wasn't thinking about the other contestants who had played perfectly but without soul. She was thinking about that night at the Grand Velvet. She remembered the fear of being invisible, the desperation of the shy waitress, and the explosion of sound that had set her free. She took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys. She began to play. The sound that filled the hall was different from the jazz she had played in the restaurant. This was a classical sonata, precise and structured, but she played it with the same raw intensity she had shown Sterling. She didn't just hit the notes. She pulled the emotion out of them. She played the slow parts with a tenderness that made people hold their breath, and the fast parts with a ferocity that made them lean forward in their seats. In the fourth row, an elderly man in a tuxedo shifted uncomfortably. It was Mr. Sterling. He hadn't come to see the winner. He had come out of boredom, expecting to hear a bunch of students play like robots. But when the music started, his head snapped up. He recognized the sound immediately. It wasn't just the skill. It was the passion. It was the same fire he had seen in the corner of his favorite restaurant. He smiled. A rare, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He watched the young woman on stage, her back straight, her hands moving like magic. And he felt a sense of pride he hadn't felt in years. He hadn't just bought a waitress a piano that night. He had helped a star find its way into the sky. Monica played the final chord, a resounding boom that echoed through the vast hall. She lifted her hands, the sound lingering in the air. She opened her eyes and looked out into the darkness. For a second there was silence. Then, like a wave crashing on the shore, the applause erupted. It wasn't just clapping. It was a roar. The audience stood up as one. Flowers began to fly onto the stage. Monica stood up and bowed, her face flushed with happiness, not embarrassment. She looked out into the crowd, knowing that somewhere out there, the grumpy old Tycoon was watching, and she hoped he was proud. She walked off the stage, her heart pounding, ready for whatever came next. She wasn't the shy waitress anymore. She was a pianist. And the music was just beginning.